Yes, okay, kind of while our unlike is actually yeah, which really.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
That was a lot louder than I expected. This is the Sidrops meeting at IETF 102. If you're not supposed to be in the Sidrops meeting, you're potentially in the wrong room. This, I'm sure, will also still be fun. Thank you very much. Before we get started too much further down, could somebody close the doors in the back? Potentially the last person who leaves. Okay. Closer to the mic. So for those people who speak at the mic, there's a pink box. Please stay in it. Please keep the mic in front of your face. A little demonstration is sometimes helpful. Here's the note well. Read it quickly. We're going to need a notes taker and a jabber scribe. Can somebody volunteer for one or both? Probably just one. Jabber. Okay, Joel will do the jabber thingy and notes. Nobody wants to take notes? You don't have to take super detailed notes. That's not notes. That's different. Okay, well, I guess we'll take notes. All right. There's actually 6 presentations. The 6th one's not on the list, but we'll sort that out. The current status, wow, that's nice. I don't know what the OBJ means, but the current set of drafts in the tree for us are these. They're all currently relatively active and being worked on. If there's the one missing from here and it's yours, you should speak up. Oh, okay. Thank you, Warren. And now we get to the presentation part. So Sharon? Oh, and you can feel free to hold the mic or put it back in the stand, and also the little clicker thing works for you. You want to hold it?
Okay. There's a little bug in my slide, by the way, that I'm going to send you an updated one after I finish talking. Okay, great, thank you. So I wanted to update on this best common practice draft, best current practice draft that we've been working on with several folks who are here. It's a very short draft. It's just some thoughts on how to use max length in the RPKI. So let me tell you what the draft is about. So I'm just going to tell you what the draft is about, and then I'm going to tell you the recommendations we make in the draft. So let's start off with something that was defined in RFC 6907, a minimal ROA. So a ROA is minimal if we have this AS and we know that it announces this set of prefixes, okay? Then the ROA is minimal if it contains only that set of prefixes. So you can see here that there's exactly the same set of IP prefixes in both the ROA and the AS. Okay, that's what it means for a ROA to be minimal. Pretty simple. Minimal ROAs are awesome. We always want to have them, as was said in RFC 6907. So why are they awesome? Is because they stop subprefix hijacks. So in this case, we have our attacker over here. And what he wants to do is hijack a prefix that's unannounced by this AS. So you can see these are the 2 prefixes he announces. The attacker is announcing this 122.0, right? You can see there's node 122.0/24. This prefix is unannounced. It's a sub-prefix of the /16. And therefore, all ASs that see this, all routers that see this announcement will prefer it because it's the sub-prefix. right? If we have the RPKI in place, we would know that this announcement is invalid because there is no prefix that matches this one in this ROA, right? So we have the .225.0/24, but not .0.0/24. Okay, so very simple. This is why we designed the RPKI. Everybody here knows this. Okay, so enter max length. So here's a loose ROA. So this ROA is not minimal. Let's look at what's in this ROA. This ROA has a /16, and this is up to max length 24. So sometimes you'll see this as like the prefix /16-24, if you've seen that before. So that's the max length attribute. So what that means is that you can announce any subprefix of the /16 up to the /24. Okay? Now, for the AS that we have here, it is the case that this ROA authorizes all the prefixes announced by this AS, right? So this prefix, the /24 here, is contained in this ROA, right? Because this ROA authorizes every subprefix up to length 24 of this AS. So that's fine. So we won't have any routes going invalid that shouldn't, which is great. The downside is this ROA is loose. It contains many prefixes that are never going to be announced by our AS. Okay, so why should you care about that? The reason you should care about that is because there's an attack that essentially obviates all the security that you get from RPKI for subprefix hijacks in this case. Okay, so we have our loose ROA, and here's the attack. This is the prefixes that are properly announced. The bug here is that this should say .225. I'm really sorry, this should say .225, okay? So sorry about that bug, I'll fix it. I'll update the slides. But here's the attack. Our attacker is announcing a subprefix, right, that is covered by this ROA, right? Actually, no, there's no bug, I'm really sorry, everything's fine. So with this, this is fine. This prefix is a subprefix of this ROA, right? But it's not announced by our AS over here. It's not in the set of prefixes that are announced. So the only time we're going to see this /24 announced is by the attacker. Okay? This is the only place that this announcement ever happens in the internet. Our attacker is smart, though, because he knows that there's a ROA. So he knows that the origin AS has to be the legitimate AS. And so what he does is he puts the legitimate AS number here, the subprefix that nobody's announcing, and then he puts his own number. Okay, so we call this a forged origin subprefix hijack. If you were Alberto, you would call this a type 1 subprefix hijack, according to the taxonomy you presented at ANRW this morning. So with a forged origin subprefix hijack, the impact is the same as the exact subprefix hijack that I showed you before. Okay, the number of ASs that would fall for this would be the same. The reason is because this is the only path to this subprefix in the internet. Okay, so the fact that you've made the path longer doesn't matter. It doesn't slow anyone down. It doesn't make it less attractive for anyone. It's still the only way to get to the subprefix. This path will win. So this attack is really bad. We don't want this attack. Okay, so that's what this draft is about. So in the draft, we explain this attack, which has appeared in other places, but we just wanted to make it very clear what this attack is. And then we make the following recommendations. Our recommendations are coming from the fact that there was a measurement study that we did a year and a half ago, I think, finding that a lot of people use max length in a way that leads to this type of attack. So they use the max length, and this type of attack is possible against their ROAs. So what we want to recommend in this draft is that operators should use minimal ROAs whenever they could. And we want to discourage the use of max length. Okay, the reason is because max length is very confusing for people. It's easy for people who are not super experts, like the people in this room, to get this wrong. And so we don't want to give people a chance to configure loose ROAs without knowing that they're doing it. Okay, and so what that recommendation comes down to is operators should avoid doing this. Designers or providers of ROA config interfaces should provide warnings to draw users' attention to the risk of using max length attribute. So, early RPKI interfaces had a form where you would fill in the AS number, the prefix, and the max length, right? And it was just kind of all sitting there in front of you. We'd like to move into a world where you can't really configure max length unless you kind of ask for it in an advanced setting and you get warnings, and make it hard for people to do this because the risk of misconfigurations is high. I think we found that more than, I don't remember what the number, but more than 80% of max length using ROAs were vulnerable to this attack. Just a note, Max length does not reduce the number of ROAs in the RPKI, it just reduces the number of prefixes in each individual ROA. So this practice does not actually cause there to be more ROAs in the RPKI, it just means that there would be lists of prefixes as opposed to just a prefix with a max length. So that's one of the key recommendations. I wanted to mention that there are cases when you cannot use a minimal ROA, so we give some recommendations there. So if you're in a case where you can't use a minimal ROA because, for instance, you want to have a ROA that includes IP prefixes that are sometimes denounced in BGP but not always, in this case, the recommendation is the ROA should include the set of prefixes that are always originated in BGP and the set of IP prefixes that are sometimes but not always originated in BGP, and no more. Okay, so try to keep it as minimal as you can. The ROA should not include any IP prefixes that will not be originated in BGP, and again, avoid the use of max length whenever you can. Okay, so it's a pretty simple draft. We just outline the attack, outline the recommendations, and we hope that this will limit misconfigurations in the RPKI. And that's it. Thanks.
Alexander Azimov, Curator Labs. Alexander. Okay, Alexander Azimov, Curator Labs. I hope you will hear me. So now it's better. My question is, what about black holing? Normally, black hole routes are for IPv4 is /32. And are you suggesting that nobody needs black holing? Or are you suggesting to update rows in case of emergency?
Joe, do you want to take this, actually?
Yes.
He's a co-author.
This industry faces a challenge related to black holing. We don't want people to set max length up to 32 for IP4 or 128 for IP6. What I will be working on with some others is we need to expose the underlying reason why a prefix is invalid. Is it invalid because of max length, because of the origin, or both? In the case of black hole routes, I want to accept these more specifics that are invalids if they contain a certain community, if they match a certain prefix list, and their RPKI origin validation state is invalid because of max length. But this is work we need to do. I think the max length feature should not be abused to facilitate black holing. We need to solve that in a different way.
I need to admit that from my personal view, I disagree here. That I agree that we need to deprecate max length, but it should be like what is covering these row is okay, including /32. Because if we are speaking about malicious activity, it will anyway bypass rows using ice path poisoning. And we should focus about ice path verification process. And it is and for rows, we should make it simpler, deprecate max length, but without any additional restrictions. Make it simpler.
Rüdiger Volk. Actually, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking some people may take this a little bit misleading, because the first and major message that has to be placed is to tell people you should not publish ROAs for which you do not intend to actually originate routes that are meant for global distribution. Everything that you publish as a ROA that does not match these criteria could be viewed as an invitation to an attacker to use that ROA. And the max length is just a way of very conveniently register a set of things that you may not actually intend to use. And and kind of the comment about the intention for global distribution seems to be something where I think actually that also addresses the black holing things, because kind of I doubt that black holing and similar function roots actually have an intended distribution reach that goes very far, and kind of actually talking about that authorizing roots that are meant for very limited distribution is something that actually should be put out. Because if we do not provide that advice, people will say, oh, I want to send this privately to Alexander, and nobody else should use it. But, well, okay, because I don't think about it, I allow Job to hijack that route globally.
Just to interject quickly. Mike's not working. Sorry, just to interject quickly. We're at the end of time, so no more questions after the two people at the mic, and keep it quick.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Warren Kumari without any hats. I'm assuming I'm missing something obvious. Let's say that I have a prefix and I announce it as a /20, and I never have plans to announce anything more specific out of that. And let's say I use it for like YouTube or something. And then somebody else like Pakistan decides to start announcing a /24. Seeing as we don't have full RPKI distribution, they then win. And I immediately need to panic and start distributing a /24 or something, Roa.
I think Randy
do I
can
do
answer
that?
your question actually, because so you're saying that like nobody's verifying RPKI ROAs, and so there's no actual prevention of attacks.
Nope, I'm saying
Okay.
not everybody is verifying RPKI.
I agree, but I think that in order to get to a world where everybody is verifying RPKI ROAs, we should have them configured as accurately as possible. And actually, Randy just presented, his co-author presented a paper this morning that people are actually turning it on. So I take the point, but I don't think that it prevents us from thinking about this problem right now.
Randy Bush, IIJ, Arcus, DRL, whatever. I don't wear hats at all. It's just an enumeration macro. It can stay or it can go. You are correct. There are no more ROAs created if the software is good, but the list of prefixes in the ROA fully enumerates, which is why it's a macro. And it is enumerated in the RPKI to router protocol, and Kayer has all the little pieces, and it eats his memory, and it eats his processing a little. Now, I've stood up many times and said, let's stop saving RAM. But I'd like to save CPU a little. But MaxLen can stay or can go. We have bigger fish to fry.
So just to comment on that. So we're not proposing removing max length from the spec. And in fact, we have a research paper that we wrote that I'm happy to send to the mailing list after this, where we wrote a little tool that would take a minimal ROA that does not use max length and compress it down using the macro. And so the proposal here is not to stop having max length or even building macros that can just compress it with that. The idea is just to not give operators this degree of freedom because we worry that they're going to make mistakes. That's what this is about. Okay, so we just want to limit misconfigurations. If you do the measurement studies, you do see that this does cause a lot of misconfigurations. So that's the thinking. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. So from the perspective of the authors, we'd love to have your comments on the list. We feel like from a technical content perspective, we've got most of what needs to be covered. If there's something we missed, please let us know. We're going to do like a bunch of editorial passes, and we're going to kind of try to wrap it up with working group last call. So if there's anything we missed, please let us know on the list as soon as possible. Also, as you can see, I'm on a short timeline, so now is the time. If you want me to do any edits, get them in now. Thank you.
All right, I think the next person up is Randy. Whatever your presentation you gave me was. The other thing. Not sure constant battle. That's right. You could.
Okay. No. No. We could let Alexander go. Yeah. No. No. Yes. How can you tell that's mine? Okay. You were supposed to have read the draft. Okay. So, within a routing trust boundary, like a POP, okay, and think hard about the term routing trust boundary. It may not be desirable and it is not necessary for all devices to individually perform origin validation. Because you're within a trust boundary, your neighbor can do it for you. I am not saying trust it from another AS. Okay? A nice use case is route reflectors. And so, yes, I can learn to use this device. So here's the cache. It is feeding the two route reflectors. They are doing origin validation. And the route reflector clients could learn this information from them. Now, what do I mean learn this information? I am suggesting that these be the only evaluations of BGP announcements and that they signal back invalids to the aggregation routers. I want to be careful about terminology because this is especially designed to be confusing. An evaluator is the device that receives routing announcements from senders and applies RPKI-based origin validation. And now comes the fun part. And signals the invalidity back to the sender, who all of a sudden is receiving the validity checking information. So watch out for the word sender here. Okay? So the hack is an evaluator can signal receipt of an invalid route and only invalid routes by announcing that route back to the sender with the prefix origin validation state extended community blah, 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 as defined in 8097. If you'll remember, 8097 was the RFC for vendor do-gooders who wanted to automatically do this and just tag prefixes validity states. I'm just reusing that extended community. Got to support Yob in some ways. Community gets a nickel for every time a community is used. The sender receiving the return prefix with the invalid marking must treat it the way it would treat an invalid origin that it itself detected. And that means withdraw any announcements of that prefix with that AS and watch out for add path. Real simple and stupid. What did you expect from me? Up. Okay. You want to cut in?
Oh.
No, you're welcome to. Okay. Now, of course, since the sending the invalid announcement is the sender's not expecting to receive it back, they need to signal the capability. So we have a wonderful new BGP capability that says I can send and receive this SCARP. Isn't this outsourcing security? No, it is not. It's remote decision making. As my friend Steve Belvin says, not letting a third party make the decision. It's simply doing it in a different computer in the same party. It's similar to a POP having a single RPKI cache with all trust vested in it. You're within the trust boundary. As with all communities which cause semantic change, chop it at your border. Don't let it outside the trust boundary, and don't let the marking to come in across the trust boundary. Drive safely.
Job Snyder's, NTT Communications. I think you're looking in the right direction. There are use cases for this type of technology. My suggestion would be to do it perhaps a little bit different. Instead of using communities in the IPv4 unicast and IPv6 unicast API, have a route reflector set up within a new API or subsequent API, I should say. Yeah, subsequent API. Communicate the invalids or communicate what it needs to say, rather than recirculate the invalids with a community that differentiates them from other things. The use of a new API, in my opinion, would be safer because you need to agree on the API. We can put in stuff like this API can only work on IBGP sessions. Yeah, keep this out of IPv4 unicast and IPv6 unicast, and we're good to go.
You're not choosing confederations anymore?
My problems are my problems.
Indeed they are.
Martin Levy, Cloudflare. Have you considered an out-of-bound method as opposed to throwing this into BGP? If you look at things like certificate transparency checking, which is done as a web API, this is a very high-level question, not meant to go down to
I've
detail.
thought of one or two of the 376 possible ones, and we could use smoke signals too.
Well, that's out of band, but yes. I mean,
I want
Have
a
you come up-
fairly
I mean-
immediate reaction. I have received that announcement
Yeah,
on a
I get
route
that
reflector client. I have told the route reflector, I want the route reflector to say,
right.
What's the simplest, stupidest way with no additional protocol?
That's additional protocol here, but I'm just, the simple question then is, so BGP in band versus an alternate method, and you're only focused on BGP. You already want to focus on a BGP method.
Yes.
Okay.
John Scudder. So does the draft address the obvious instability problem? If it doesn't, if it does, I'll go read it. Okay.
No, it does not.
So here's my concern.
Read about back, forth,
which I will illustrate with an example, is the peering router gets, prefix A from, peers 1 and 2. He prefers peer 1. Sends it on to the route reflector. The route reflector sends back, no, you won't either. So the peering router says, okay, great. I'll choose my backup route number 2. So he withdraws route number 1 towards the route reflector. What does the route reflector do now?
Redecides.
So he withdraws the thing that says, no, you won't either. Now the peering router doesn't have any state telling him not to accept route number 1.
1 again.
Lather, rinse, repeat.
Okay, Patel, I'm just clarifying. The route reflector simply does the validation. The receiving guy, when it receives an invalid route, for all practical reasons, thinks it as a dampened or an invalid route. In this case, takes the route out of the best path decision or path out of the best path decision and just follows with the n-1 to rerun the best path. If he runs out, he's got no paths.
Let me ask, sorry, John. Let me ask it a different way, John. It's the same if that peering router was doing validation by itself.
No, it's not, because
Prefix 1,
the peering router always has the validation data. In the way it's currently spec'd, the peering router always contains the validation database. So when the candidate route arrives, the peering router evaluates it, says no, and then moves on. Now instead,
it chooses the alternate.
Sorry?
It chooses its alternate.
Correct.
And the alternate, is invalid. And then it tries for the best path over the left.
So I guess I will defer to the chairs
It's just remote signal.
whether we should
Take
pursue
this out of band.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
how are we for time, guys?
And also mitigation suggestion would be fun.
Well, tell you what, I will yield to the rest of the line, and then if we have time, I'll.
No,
be
no,
glad to
no,
come
no,
back to it.
definitely interested.
Doug Montgomery Nest, just to be clear, so when I get back invalid from the route reflector, I'm to treat all updates I've received, both EBGP and IBGP, with the same prefix origin pair as invalid?
With the same prefix origin AS as invalid.
With the same full AS path?
No,
So just prefix origin, that pair. I treat all entries in my rib as invalid when I get it back from the reflector. No?
yes,
Oh, that's interesting.
that,
It's truly a question. I'm not picking. Oh, right. But I'm saying when I get it back from the route reflector and it says this prefix origin pair is invalid, I look in my rib and I find all such prefix origin pairs specific, right? That match that, and I treat them as invalid also.
There are,
No?
so just interjecting, there are no all prefixes like that, because you always get the invalid in context of a prefix and a path. One prefix and a path.
Well, I chose one as best path and sent it to the reflector,
Yeah.
right? There could have
Yeah.
been alternate path, alternate pairs that I
Yes.
received the same prefix origin pair
Yes.
for.
So
So I'm
you
going to
can-
project out and mark them all invalid.
You can mark all the subsequent paths of those prefixes, correct?
Okay.
If you like, that would be an implementation detail.
As a
Whether you want to inherit that on the other parts that have the same origin pairs.
Okay. Clearly, I should read the draft and see what it says. As a passing comment, the NIST prototype of both origin validation and path validation has always done an out-of-band protocol to a validation server. And so there's other approaches to doing this without doing it in BGP.
sure there are.
Well, sorry, somebody made the comment as to whether or not we wanted to change BGP machinery or just have a simple remote procedure call kind of protocol that validates this. So there's one instance of an implementation and a documented protocol that does that.
Jeff Haas. Out of band, good. You've heard one example of somebody actually doing it. As the draft describes it, not good. We need this to be in a different place of the pipeline. We want this before it hits rib in, not at rib out, which is sort of where you're doing your U. That's the main thing. Second thing, consider.
But then if I'm pushing that to remote, I have a significant delay in my ribbon path.
You are correct. But it is, for some of the reasons that John will get to, that would be the place to do it. You would need a little additional binding to be able to figure out what the full loop looks like. It'll smell like AdPath. It won't be AdPath, it'll smell like. The second comment is, you're thinking origin validation right now. Think this also later on for outsourcing HPSec.
Job from NTT again. In the case the well-known community no advertise is associated with an RPKI invalid, the announcement will not make it to the route reflector, and the route reflector does not have the opportunity to signal back this is a poisonous route. So
Jared Mach, Akamai. You can match on well-known things and override the behavior if you want to send it to a route reflector. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but you can do this.
this way lays madness. However, if you use an API to pre-populate the edge router with everything that's invalid, this is not an issue.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Nope. All right. Check. Next person after Randy is Alexander.
Good afternoon. One more time. My name is Alexander Azimov. I'm from Curator Labs. And today I'm going to discuss with you possible methods of future security BGP deployment. And let's start with the current state. One may find the current state of BGP security terrifying. There are regional events that are happening on a regular basis. There are numerous local events that goes fully undetected. There is malicious activity that may took days or even weeks with full support of the community to shut down the intraday, because there is no support from the BGP protocol itself. And okay, there are problems, root leaks and hijacks. But the problem is not limited to the anomaly itself. The problem is that these anomalies are propagated. And what do we have to detect these anomalies in the wild? Here is BGP security quadrant. And we have several tools that are capable to detect mistakes, hijacks, mistake root leaks. There are old, well-known IRR filters with old, well-known problems, such as problem with authorization, problem with naming, problem with outdated data. There is ROAS, which is finally on fly. It's great news that recently several huge IXs have started to drop invalids at the level of Route 7. There are also several drafts that are targeting detection of mistake root leaks using additional attributes. And it is believed that to detect malicious activity, we all need BGP-sec. And this BGP extension has several well-documented problems. The most highlight here is computational cost. It has great computation overhead. But there is another one which I was not able to find in the available literature, and it is backward compatibility. The RFC states that if we receive, if our neighbor can't speak BGP-sec, we're switching back to the plain old BGP. And my question is, what will make an attacker to support BGP-sec? Does it mean that to secure BGP-sec, to secure BGP, we need to make attackers to support BGP-sec? For me, it sounds at least weird. The results is here. But don't be too upset, because as far as I know from numerous discussions, nobody was going to deploy BGP-sec during their lifetime. So it's a room of opportunity. And let us learn from the mistakes and clearly specify the goals, what we need from any kind of protocol extension to detect malicious hijacks and root leaks. So what we need? We have already origin validation with roles. We need opportunity to detect invalid ICE paths. And it should, of course, support incremental deployment. And it should be lightweight, there should be no signatures in BGP that must be checked. There should be no BGP messages, no address families, and so on, so on, so. It must be simple to have a chance to be deployed in near future, because we have already in the world of disaster. And let's go back and speak about the anomaly propagation. It doesn't matter, it is hijack or root leak. It's propagated likewise any other prefix announce. It goes from origin, or the attack, it doesn't really matter, to providers, to the upper providers, to peers, and after this, of course, to the downstreams, to the customer cone, and so on and so on. And if we will be able to detect it at level when it is propagated to providers and peers, we are done. And there is a wonderful thing about routes that are received by providers and peers. If we learn a route from provider or peer, in its ICE path, there may exist only customer to provider pairs. And that's all. So to be able to not validate, but verify ICE path, we need a validated database of customer to provider relations. And that's all. So to achieve this goal, we propose a new API object. It's called Autonomous System Provider Authorization. It has 3 fields. First one is the customer. He's a record holder, he's signing the object. Second is the provider. And the last one is address family, because connectivity in different address families, especially IPv4, IPv6, of course, can greatly vary. So, of course, there are some boundary cases. For transit-free networks such as IXS and Tier 1s, it can be easily solved. So we need to signal that routes from these ISPs should not be received from any customer or peer. And it's likewise row 0. We suggest that they should create a single ISPA record with value 0. That's all. There are also some kinds of complex relations that happen between ISPs, especially that are at the same administrative control. It also solves in a simple way. They just need to create symmetric ISPAs. So let's go to the verification process. I think that I don't need to describe that we can split ISPath into pairs of different ISNs where all prepend values are ignored. And after that, we have a verification process that is very similar to raw validation. We are gathering all candidate ISPaths. We are checking if there is overlaps. If there is overlaps, then it returns valid. If there is no overlaps, it returns invalid. And if there are invalid pairs in the ISPath was leaked or malformed, and we doesn't really care. So here is an example of how it works. Here, Autonomous System 4 is an attacker. It will be trying to hijack address space that belongs to Autonomous System 1. But Autonomous System 1 was prepared. So it has signed its address space with rows. It has ISPA records that are saying that it has single provider IS2. And also Autonomous System 2 and 3 also have created rows. So let's start. First of all, IS4 may try just to announce address space that belongs to IS1. Of course, it will make conflicts with row, and it will be detected, and I hope it will be dropped. Learning from its mistake, IS4 may try to malform ISPath by adding IS1 into the beginning of the ISPath. But we can easily detect it using ISPath. Next, IS4 may try, in addition, to add even IS2 into ISPath. Again, it will raise conflicts. The last thing that IS4 may try to do is to remove itself from the ISPath. But again, it will raise conflict because IS3 must check that the neighbor ISN is present in the ISPath. So there is no way attacker may create an ISPath that is valid according to rows and ISPath. And small benefit, this process may be fully automated. So I think 2 years ago I was presenting BGP roles. That's a configuration option that can be negotiated between BGP neighbors. And to avoid mistakes, it's quite suitable here. So we have a configuration option that says that this link belongs to customer, this link belongs to provider, this link belongs to peer. And with this option, we can automate on which links we should apply IcePath verification, on which we should not. Because it doesn't work on provider links. We can't verify IcePath for routes that are received from providers. We should thank here IXS because they are not present in the IcePath. Also, there are some structural limitations. There still could exist replay attacks. The provider can send malformed routes to its customers, so because it can't be verified. But I don't think this is a showstopper here. There are still several open questions. The most critical one is about ICE sets, and I'm speaking not about IRR objects. I'm speaking about the weight segment in the ICE path that may still exist. It provides a backdoor. Science with ICE set, it doesn't have order, and so it can't be fully verified. The question is, how should we be aggressive? Maybe it's time to drop it. Maybe it's not. I will be glad to hear your opinion here. And there are several other questions. Some of them were already discussed in the mailing list. So please feel free to get back to me or other authors and share your view, or go to the mailing list. Maybe it's the best choice here. And summary. This API record is really simple. It scales. We are not bringing any new messages, new signing inside BGP protocol itself. It has a low computational cost, and with ROS and ASPA together can provide a full solution for malicious activity in BGP. And maybe one day we will wake up in a next beautiful world. So thank you for listening. Questions, please.
John Scudder. So I have two comments. The first is, as far as I can tell, this proposal from 10,000 meters is isomorphic to SOBGP. And has all the same security properties that SOBGP had.
Yes, we don't change BGP at all. We just provide.
So I don't know if you remember SOBGP, but this is basically the same thing, which is fine. I think all the protocol bits that you have are nicer than all the protocol bits that were in SOBGP, so it's an improvement. So that's comment one. And it's interesting. I haven't read your draft yet. Based on this talk, I will go and read it. The second thing is just that in your motivation, you were talking about how BGPSec got it completely wrong because it's asking the attacker to participate in BGPSec. And I think you are mistaken about that. And it doesn't really affect the rest of your talk. So if I were you, I would just drop that claim. The reason I think you're mistaken is the underlying assumption in BGPSec is that once you start deploying it, you start preferring valid BGPSec routes over non-BGPSec routes. As long as you have that policy, the attack that you're conceiving doesn't work.
Yeah, but more specifics.
Sorry?
But if attacker use more specifics, you will not drop more specific routes if you have a less specific one that is valid.
Well, see previous talk about making sure.
Yeah, I remember.
So I mean, it's not really necessary to make that extreme claim in order to support your proposal. So if I were you, I just wouldn't.
Okay. Thank you for suggestion.
Sriram, NIST. Have you thought about the situation where NAS has a lateral peering relationship, say in North America, with another AS, and the same AS, and that AS in Europe has a customer-provider relationship? That has happened in practice. Have you thought about how to create the ASPA in such a situation?
Yes. Here's the answer. Just create symmetric ASPAs. That's all you need. It doesn't provide any restrictions that one should be only a customer to another. Okay, it's not a problem.
So here it says AS1 is a customer of AS2 and AS2 is a customer of AS1.
Yes,
You mean?
and that's all. It just solves the problem of complex.
Okay, I need to think about that some more.
To both Randy Bush, IJ, to both continue John's thought and also to disagree with it a little. This has the two major problems to me of SOBGP, which is over-revealing of relationships, and it's per AS, not per prefix. But why you like the protocol a little better than SOBGP is SOBGP in a fair number of its later iterations transported the database within BGP, which this is not doing, which is why it appears a little cleaner. But I'm not complaining about that. Right, it's reusing the RPKI, which is cool.
Yeah, thank you for comment.
And Warren Quarry, just a quick note. Sriram and I have a document from like 2012 which deprecates AS sets, and it's now on version 12 because we just rev the date and the version number every now and then. If people really want it, we can progress it.
Yeah. Hands up.
Where? Okay, where? Here? And that's what I thought you were gonna say.
So I think there are no comments left. Thank you for listening.
George?
Just reach around.
Would I like the poker thing? Wow. Yeah. How many people in the room were not in IEPG? Okay, too many of you. So this is an attempt to talk about the fundamental deployment problem with something the RIRs would like to do. We have a concern with an exposure of risk in the current model of validation in RPKI, which is basically an all or nothing model. All resources must be correct in the entire chain of trust between you and a trust anchor all the time for all assertions to hold. And if anything is not currently correct because somebody has overclaimed, then all your products are dead, all of them. And the higher up a tree towards the root you go, the more the risk of unexpected damage to unrelated party rises. And we feel that this is an operational burden which the community should not have to bear. We think that a reconsideration of validation that provides for pruning the tree of resources to the subset which are valid, so that you can continue down the chain to find the things that would not be affected by this mistake, operationally has lower consequential risk to the entire community of relying parties. When we first presented this idea, we didn't expect to come out the door with a discretely different OID. The thing here is that certificates can only have one OID. That's the nature of an X509 certificate as I understand it. And since the OID defines the validation model, and since there was no consensus in the room to agree to repurpose the validation model of the existing OID, it is necessary to accept that there will be a new OID. And that immediately puts on the table the transition question. So if we think that we have to move to a new model, there is this fundamental requirement that requires some degree of coordination. And I absolutely stress, I do not mean to imply hierarchy of ordering of the things that have to be considered here. I'm just saying there appear to be a minimum of 3 things that have to be thought about. You need to have code. And that's on two sides, to both make things and validate things. And you need to have an agreement in the community at large, which principally is about both the signers and the relying parties that they want to move. But you also have to know how you're going to move. So the document about deploying validation reconsidered effectively kind of implicitly said, well, we use the same mechanism that we do for rolling the algorithm. It's a mechanism, you just put up stuff and then you have a transition in an orderly manner in 24 hours, and at the end of it, you shut down the old tree, you go with the new tree, we're in a new world. Some of us have a feeling that it might be better to think about operating permanently in a mode where both OIDs can exist, because it effectively offers an extra bit of information. It's the bit that says, I'm saying that my children's minted with this OID have behavior A, or I'm saying with the OID minted like this, they have behavior B, which would allow flexibility. People could say, I asked my parent to make me a strict tree. I don't ever want you to validate things if I overclaim. Or they could say, no, I think there are operational risks here. I want to be signed into a world that if overclaims happen, prune, don't throw. So let's think about these things one by one. So code change, by the way, this is an unmodified pack from a presentation given in IEPG, and if I could try to short circuit and represent the views of a speaker in the room at the time, my first bullet may be wrong, because in fact, changes are not minimal to signer. I don't remove his right to stand up and say it for himself, but in principle, I believe they were a simpler class of change than for relying parties. But the fact is, there is quite a high change burden, even on signing side, because the depth of the burying of this behavior into dependent libraries and related systems is quite high. But nonetheless, the changes in some sense felt to me minimal. You just have to say, I want to use an OID, and you put it in a certificate. If you choose to go with mixed mode, they're slightly bigger, because you now have to think about user interface and systems and flags to say type A or type B. But these are reasonably contained. But for validators, for verifiers, there is this other burden. You now have to live in a world where previously you were carrying with you the data structure down from the root or up from the bottom of what assets you care about. And at any point, if you find they don't exactly match or are fully covered by their parent, you're out of the game and things have terminated. But now we're saying, no, you have to go and get some malloc memory or some other space. You have to construct a tree of the things that are valid, hang on to the things that are invalid for error reporting, and carry on inside your recursing structure or whatever you're doing. You actually have to mint new data structures. So the burden of code construction to make a validator for the new model, got to accept that it's actually a bit higher. The principal point here is that we don't actually have anything deployed. Now, at some level, we think signers could probably deploy more rapidly, but the fact remains there aren't any. It's my belief that the right validator community actually did talk about this, and the developers have discussed this and have thought about coding this model, but it's not currently in deployment. And the two other principal packages that are used, RP-Stir and Dragon Research, they don't have code that does this. So in the community of code packages that make certs or validate certs, this code just doesn't exist. And for APNIC, we are exposed to an immediate issue here, because our relationship is not that all things we sign exist directly with holders and users as assets. We have intermediaries, the national internet registries, and we know that of the NIR communities, 2 of them are in deployment using Dragon Research software, and 2 more are actively testing the deployment. So we're walking into a regime where we know that there are people using systems that don't have the ability to use the new OID. Okay, so let's think about the second arc, getting agreement to move. We haven't had any sense of engaged conversation about this. So we haven't had a dialogue where we're talking with the real users of this in routing. What are your feelings here? Where do you want to go? How do you feel about the cost burden of a flag day? And we feel like if we're going to put a line in the sand and say, all right, we're going to propose concretely a transition document that says date July 2019. I mean, it's an arguing point, and in principle, the doc could get modded, but nonetheless, we feel like we should be out there talking in the community before we put a date forward. And we kind of feel that doing things in Sidrops acts as if the closing moment is definitionally in this room, and we feel a little more like there's a conversation to be had with operations communities at the NOG circuit to understand from people who are in deployment mode what their feelings are here. Okay, so The third question I put on the table about what kind, the flag day, that's really lovely because it is compellingly simple. You just perform a bounded transition across the interval that's stipulated for completion of all relying parties to completely refresh against the new state, and then you're done. But if we want to go to a mixed mode of operation, if we feel like the benefit of an added bit of knowledge in the tree is there, we actually have to think about this a bit harder. And the primary problem for us as registries comes down to the moment when we add the new OID high in the tree, principally when we put it into our TAL. If we create a TAL, a root object, a trust object that bears the new OID, and all the relying party software does not accept this OID, we have immediately invalidated the state of the entire validation tree for those relying parties. So that's a very difficult move to make. It's kind of one where we have to see acceptance and consent to move. Otherwise, we are simply preemptively destroying the tree. So we really have to achieve some sense of understanding here. Oh, sorry, whoever's got the microwave on, your coffee's hot. Do not give me the forks. That is extremely rude in my culture. That's better. That means I'm entitled to take a field goal in Australian rules football. Well done. Okay, so this is kind of a three-way deadlock, you know. Both wrestlers are on the ground and the ref is knocked out too. We can't move without code and we haven't got any code. We can't move without consent from the people involved. We haven't sought consent. And we can't deploy a new TAL without either of the above. So basically, nothing's happening here. A parallel question is who's actually in the game? And I did some basic work looking into our logging fabrics. Are you going to use up my 2 minutes?
I'm just waiting. Go ahead.
Okay. Do I get extra time for wasting time asking questions? Okay, so I did some rough measurements, and I see somewhere around 300 IPs from 178 ASNs doing rsync, which really has to cover the 65 IPs and 39 ASNs I see doing RRDP. An interesting moment in IEPG is that Randy said he has radically different numbers here. And I think we may have a little moment where we find a student to do some measurements on who is in system and where they're looking, because that's kind of weird. Remember, this is an all-encompassing framework. If you look at us, you should be looking everywhere. Everyone should be seen everywhere all the time. And that doesn't seem to be the case, which is kind of weird. So I was able to gather from user agent strings in RRDP what the rough count is of the distribution between RP-Stir, Dragon software, and RIPE. And my rough feeling is that it's approximately 2 to 1 are using RP-Stir and Dragon. It's possible those numbers are wrong, but in no sense is the majority of the community using RRDP. And in that sense, in no sense is the majority of the community using code that I know has potential to do modified validation, because RIPE indicated they would think about it. So in a world where there are 3 platforms in the space and only one of them is thinking about implementing, and they're not even the dominant player, we're not heading to a trajectory where the community is going to be using new OID-aware software. So that's kind of a strong message. It is already a distributed problem. This is the breakdown of the economies of the prefixes that came to me doing validation. So my sense is, in no sense is this an activity where I only have to talk to 1 or 2 people. We, the community interested in making the move, we actually have to talk to a lot of people spread across a lot of places. So if we're going to do this, it's actually quite a big burden. But I don't think waiting, not talking about this, I don't think anything gets easier here, because we're talking about a change that I believe is a conversation with under 500 parties. The number of downstream affected people, the IP coverage, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the moment of change. How many people have to engage to have a moment of change here? And it feels like it's under 1,000, and it's a distributed problem. Logistically, choosing to flag day it would be a hell of a lot simpler. And I've even proposed the hack, which no one will want, which is simply to mark the OID as understood, but continue to reject if it's an overclaim. At a bare minimum, that would allow the world to carry on working if we move to a new OID. But obviously it's a hack, because it means you're not respecting the model of validation. So in that spiritual sense of honoring the principle of an OID in a certificate, it's a complete fail. That's it.
Thanks. Hi, Chris Morrow.
Hi, Chris.
Hello. It seems like roughly you're proposing there's three things. You seem to prefer one, which is a flag day. You point out that there's potentially 500 some users who would be network operators who would be affected.
Yeah.
I think none of the answers really look great, but I think picking one as opposed to vacillating would be good. So picking one and picking a date that's achievable, and then trying to figure out how to message to people who are certainly going to be affected.
Yeah.
Seems like your goal.
Yes,
Seems
that
like
is
a
my
goal
goal.
that you
How
should-
do we get into a conversation with people who are affected so that we
So,
can achieve a target for a flag day, assuming we want a flag day outcome?
Let's just go with that assumption for now because it's easy. I think one thing to think about is the 500 people as 500 people that are fetching, they're not necessarily using. So
Now, long ago, I would have said that's inconceivable, but having looked in logs, I know that's true because at least 3 of the user agent strings appear to be web browsers that have walked into the RRDP URLs in someone's documentation and they're refreshing for no purpose. So yes, that definitely exists. It's a superset. It's not just people doing work.
So I think there are folks in the ripe area, Joe, who are looking at RPKI stuff and potentially know they're either pushing people to do this, so they know which deployments are happening. Same thing in LACNIC, Carlos's folks, or my brain is skipping my old AD, who's probably in the room. Not Joel.
Billy Joel.
I'll figure it out later. But the point is, I think there's folks in region that probably have some idea of what's going on. Discussing this, being very loud and very clear at some Nanog, RIPE, AppNIC, whatever equivalent LACNIC things.
Well, that is our general intent. Get out into that community and
say,
engage with people.
On this date, on or about this date, we're going to take this action. If you don't have your software updated to this version, you're going to be sad.
Yeah, but it's a triangle. And if the software authors are sitting there saying, nah,
Well,
sorry, nah.
The thing is, we have to pick a direction. I think we have to pick a direction. That's your stance here. I think maybe Randy's going to come up and say differently.
Well, I think he probably is.
But if we're going to do this, we
Yes.
need to pick a direction and go. It's
Yes.
at least 12 to 18 months, so we should do it now.
Yes.
And if we wait another year or 2 years, that number is going to be more than 500.
Yes, it's always a moment when your co-author gets up to the microphone queue because he's probably going to say something that says, what George said was completely not what I intended. No, he's walked away from the mic. He's walking back. He's walking back. He's walking back. Rob, hit me, Rob. Hit me with your rhythm stick.
I meant Alvaro.
Hit me. Hit me.
Rob Austin.
Hit me short and hit me thick. Hit me, hit
Smaller
me, hit
number of
me.
hats than Randy, but still too many. A couple of things. First of all, there's an item missing from one of your slides, George, and this is a little disingenuous, no offense. There are 3 choices on the scheduling. We could do the flag day, we could do the gradual, or we could do the when hell freezes over.
Yes, the implicit do nothing choice
Right.
always
That's kind
exists.
and no offense, that's kind of, yeah. Secondly, there are actually 2 separate conversations here, one of which you are making it difficult to have by not having a draft. Yes, I know there's upstairs politics about that, but this is the IETF. We discuss drafts here with like actual schedules and timelines and considerations rather than PowerPoint. So next time you do this, please have a draft or, stop wasting our time.
Yeah, I deserve that. The decision not to bring a draft
Right.
disrespects the process in the room. I get that, but that was the decision.
And the other thing is, unfortunately, a conversation that really can't happen here. So I will mention its existence, and then it has to go somewhere else, which is, this is a cost transfer, and that is not something we can really usefully discuss here. But this is the RIRs offloading their legal costs.
The people who would suffer the consequence of an operational mistake that caused overclaim are not just the RIRs and their lawyers. It's a consequential risk to the community of users. I mean, you don't buy it, but that's my honest belief.
Okay, fine. If you're going to insist on doing this here. One of the 2,735 mistakes the RIRs could make would in fact have exactly this effect. And that's what this fixes, okay? The problem is that this is the only one the RIRs seem to care about because this is the one where they get sued.
Well, Randy's going to talk to that. Tim. Knock holes in me, Tim. It's fashionable.
So yeah, Tim Bruinzeel is no longer with RIPE-NCC actually, but Anonat Labs. So I can't speak for RIPE-NCC, but I can speak from memory a bit as to the implementation in the API validator by the RIPE-NCC. So version 2 of that was implementing the reconsidered protocol at some point, but as a global setting.
Right.
And changing that to respect a per certificate choice based on the OID should not be that hard. But I understand there's more players in the room, and this is just one of the validators.
So when I said there was potential for the right validator to be in this space, I wasn't overclaiming.
No, I think it can be done for the version 3. I wasn't involved in that project. There was a decision not to do this until it would become clear what the path forward is. But regardless, there's a new OID. So no matter what, current software doesn't support it. So there would have to be an update to support this particular OID.
Yeah, and for the community of use, if you're stuck in software A and you've built your portal around software A and software A isn't going to adopt the OID, you're in a very bad place.
And I think there are 3 choices here indeed. So one is don't deploy. Another is look at the algorithm rollover document that's in existence as a best practice, but that still includes flag days. It just prescribes that the whole tree should have the same OIDs. And you can look at a mixed model, which also has flag days, but I think less often. Finally, I don't know if you can agree to disagree on this with other people, but the way I see it, this is not an excuse to cause overclaims, but this is a way to just limit those things. And I've always felt that the change was fairly minimal, in the sense that what it's trying to do is it just limits the impact to resources that are under dispute. This is something that any CA that has a overclaiming certificate could fix if they were aware of the fact that their certificate has been shrunk. This doesn't always happen though. Yes, it's good if you can avoid this in transfers, but the reality is you may not be able to. So, is that a big enough problem that this should be deployed? I don't know. I can't speak for the RARs anymore, obviously, but I know that the problem is felt big there. Operators, I think it's good to reach out to the operator community because they should think about this. Do we want to be impacted by this or not?
Randy Bush, IJ, Arcus, blah, blah, blah. Operators should think about what? Where's the document? This isn't just disrespectful of the process. This is disrespectful of the people here. And the people you will go around showing this slide deck to who cannot see exactly what I'm being asked to buy into. And I agree with Chris, if we're going to do this, better start soon. But start what soon? If you don't give us the document, we're so expletive. Documents take a while here. And there's a document by Tim and Oleg documenting the RIPE validator algorithm that has been in this working group for almost 6 years, and all messages to the chairs fall on the floor. That's what I'm really talking about because Oleg asked me to twice in the last week. Got the message?
Sure.
Thank you.
Rudiger.
Rudiger Volk. Yes, also coming back to the question of how well is the required communication working? In my view, this group is the identified forum where this technology is being discussed. It would be a potentially good thing for having an actually existing forum of the people who are actually operating stuff. I'm not aware that that is available and being developed. Kind of the first thing that has to happen to actually having documents to be scrutinized here And quite certainly, I would not go away where you essentially bypass this group and start discussing details with operational groups, which in the end certainly have to contribute so that the operational aspects actually get fitted in. But kind of the thing has to actually be done first here. Or, well, okay, you are free. You are free to instigate an RPKI operators group that actually has rules and that has an existing mailing list and a website where all the relevant information is published. And there is actually a lot of RPKI operational information that is published in very desperate ways, which means it's not really available for people who are not spending lots of effort getting it.
Randy from blah, blah, blah. There actually is such a mailing list and such a group, but little places like Deutsche Telekom and and other things like that aren't big enough to participate.
Right. So Tim again, I think realistically you can only set a date when you have a good understanding that relying party tooling will be updated in a way that's well defined and understood. So I do think it's good to talk to operators that maybe not be in this room. But I think that a good understanding of, we now understand if it's a mixed model or whatever, we now understand this thing to work in a particular way. I think that has to be a shared understanding between relying party builders.
Thank you. Oh, it's Randy's turn.
I'm going to try to abbreviate this. George and I did this dance at the IPG meeting. When Nietzsche said this, he was not talking about religion. He was saying that we are responsible for this is the birth of existentialism. We're responsible for our own acts. God is not. Don't blame her. We're responsible for our own acts. Where's the clicker? This is no fun without a clicker. Okay, George and I are actually friends. We write papers together. We work together. We had lunch together. But maybe it's more like brothers. We fight a little. But we, not our masters, are responsible for our actions. So you have my sympathy, George, but the facts are the facts. The real problems with the RPKI, what actual problems do we have? And I'm an engineer, I worry about problems. I'm a researcher, we only care about problems, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the RPKI is doing fairly well, and warning, some of these data are old and I'm going to whiz through them. Routing relies on it, which is why I care. But when we look at current publication, which is mostly by the RIRs, it is not of operational quality. Okay, what matters is what the customer sees when they install an RP and run it. Don't tell them to tune it. Don't tell them to change the TAs. Don't tell them to stand on their left foot and hold their nose. What do you understand, not understand about normal user? Okay, here's one thing installed. This is a problem. APNIC is very aware of it. They hate it. George is suffering. He's caught between his masters and reality. My sympathy, George, I bought you lunch. Okay? The same thing shows on Dragon Research RP, except the eye candy has less sugar. And there is no trust anchor role protocol. This is our mistake. I'm not.
Strictly speaking, it's trust anchor locator role, but
yeah,
yeah, same
TAL
problem.
role, correct. Okay. Certification problems. They've gone on for years. Everything below this RIR CA went missing because the E certificate had a different expiration for the manifest than the CA. They went away. They don't have a knock. It goes on and on. Okay, I won't drill it down. These are some old data, right? You see, that's inability to fetch for days. They didn't monitor. They have no knock. They don't work weekends. I had to write a friend. This is old data. They still do not have a knock. They still do not work weekends. Okay, that's fine. Except they're asking us to rely on it operationally. That's not fine. If you can't do it yourself, outsource it to a real ops group. Okay, and it goes on. Here, something was rotten in Amsterdam. This went on for weeks. It was logging in our logs. It was an NFS problem. Nothing can be wrong. Finally, they fixed it. Blacknix, TA expires for weeks. Okay, weird data. RFC 7115 says rsync must be hierarchic directory structure so it can just fetch it with one TCP setup instead of 5,000. Here's the 5,000. Ripen APNIC, make you fetch all of them and it takes forever. Ripe fixes it. Look how wonderful that is. And look at a nice clean key roll, by the way. They doubled their objects, went back to normal. So APNIC still has not fixed that. They're still out of RFC on that. And everybody running rsync pays the TCP setup price. Okay. Luckily, the RP software is willing to use stale data. But how long is stale? Our IRs have had 3- and 5-day outages of various services. Now, of course, I never make mistakes. Right? You're supposed to laugh. But, you know, you can reach me on weekends. But we've had no major RPKI disasters recently. Okay? So let's make some. Blame delegation. APNIC has the problem of having a child repository that's CNNIC, that's behind the firewall. APNIC and CNNIC have been working on this for, you could have had a child. But it's the same as a DNS blame delegation, right? How do we support that? Okay. DNS changes a root server. They send out email to everybody. Everybody ignores it. Everybody keeps accessing that IP address forever. But the DNS protocol is designed for this. No one notices and it all works. Okay. The RPKI trust anchors, or TALs, as Rob points out. An RPKI, an RIR wants to change their TAL, and they've done this a lot. They send out an email, everybody ignores it, but the protocol was not designed for this. Things break, and the RIRs blame the user. So let's deploy a major change to the core of crypto validation. Let's have a flag day. This is an actual count, and you'll notice it's quite different than George's, of the number of RRDP fetchers, unique IDs fetching RRDP, and unique IDs fetching rsync. That those are significantly different from George's is fun, and we're already agreed to scrape up a grad student, fetch all the CAs, and find out why this is different. As I said, George and I are friends and do research together. But there's a lot of folk out there to have a flag day. As Chris says, it ain't going to get less. If we're going to do a change, do it now. Okay? But do what now? Where does it say what we're going to do? Where's the document I can read? If I want to convince my fellow operators, researchers, or whoever the hell's foolish enough to associate with me what to do, where is the document? Okay? If the IANA was the single point of trust as we expected, they are conservative about this. They document things. They're the other extreme. And they're successfully rolling things. Okay? But RIRs politically refuse to let the IANA do anything, except their cash, of course. The RIRs aren't operators. They're like PTTs. So the protocols don't have the resilience. Our bad. And that's what we should be working on. RIRs have operational and publication problems repeatedly. They need to fix this or outsource it or whatever. Validation reconsidered solves a problem that they are not having. And it will make things less predictable and understood, and it looks like it's going to be a flag day. So how that flag day works, what's going to happen when people fall out and don't make it, how that's detected, how it will be fixed, etc., needs to be documented. But we will learn to love validation reconsidered.
Can you go back to the Job Snyder's entity? Can you go back
I
to
can't go back to Job Snyder's.
the third slide?
Third slide.
That one. So that's it. Yes.
That's the 8th slide.
Unfortunately, this is not how things look when you install the software as shipped. For instance, the ARINTEL will never be there. And I've deployed RPKI in a number of commercial ISPs in the Netherlands now. And invariably, every time we install this beast, there is no moment where it clicks that it's
Agree,
incomplete.
that's another problem. And I should check how I got the ARINTEL in there. I do not, I just built a VM, threw it up and did it. And clearly I have indeed manipulated the towels because also the Alt-CA towel is there. Yep. But the fact that the ARINTEL wouldn't be there is a serious problem.
It is very, very concerning.
Yep. Good point.
I have spoken with some of the RERs to create a feedback loop between their own RPKI services and how that looks from an operational perspective. So for instance, this weekend I proposed to KV that KRoot should do origin validation, and that way they'll suffer in the same way.
One of
that
the
we are suffering.
grad students who works with us has a listing of all the root servers and what their ROA status is. I think rpki.me would be interesting for people.
Similarly, I asked Aaron to do origin validation in their own infrastructure as well. So perhaps when they eat their own dog food, things will improve a little bit. But other than that, you've made a list of excellent points. Thank you.
But you know, we need to think about what we can do to make this more resilient. That's our job. And we have been lax about that. Mea culpa. Okay? But I think we're not as bad as the operators, in fact, creating a mess today. Kaveh, you're not wearing a suit. Why should we trust you?
Actually, that's why you should trust cover as per ripeness. This is just an informational point. Yeah, yes, for KRoot, we have ROAs for the prefixes we announced. And we got a proposal to actually start origin validation, which we're looking into. So at least for our multi-home home sites, we are going to do origin validation.
You're going to publish a 24-hour number?
Sorry?
You're going to publish a 24-hour number?
We will publish.
No, a telephone number that can be called 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if there is an operational
So
problem.
RIPE NCC in general has that, and there is a procedure. It's a general number that at the back they have procedure that if it's about this, then send it to that support engineer. So we already have that. We don't have it for RPKI, specifically for any part of RPKI subsystem, but I think that's another thing we have to consider to set up support for that.
Cool. Thank you. Tim?
All right, thank you. Okay. So, Randy, did you read this document? Yeah, it's okay. Thanks. Great. Good. And I did get some comments from some people, but I figured maybe let me ask the room if people looked at this, because this goes into the issue that there's no way currently to roll a trust anchor key in the RPKI, and I think it's an issue we should be thinking about. So I know some of you have read it. Nobody wants to show their hand, like, yeah, we looked at it. We'll look at it later. Okay, well, anyway, let me go on. So, comments. Most often I hear from people, you should be looking at how this is done in DNSSEC. And I think that's true, that there are lessons to be learned there. And, well, you may not be any better in RPKI at the moment, to be honest. At least they have something. But yeah, there are lessons to be learned. So, what can we learn? Well, first of all, I did talk about this at the last IETF, and then I made a quadrant about, is this important, urgent, where are we? And I figured then maybe this is really important to me at least, but maybe it's not super urgent, but I cannot reconsider that position to myself. I think this is also urgent. I think this is something that needs to be addressed before you have a bigger number of relying party tools out there that don't support whatever algorithm there is. Then there are lots of things in RFC 5011 that are very DNS specific. And while they make up for an interesting read, I'm not so sure that they really apply here because the model of getting things is differently. There is no time to live with regards to if you get this certificate that's mentioned on the TEL, you can keep it for so long. Essentially, you get it every time. You may keep a little backup, but it's pretty undefined actually. So maybe that's something that should be better defined, but backup keys, yeah, so that's possible in DNSSEC. I'm not sure that we should go there, to be honest, because you can easily end up in a situation where you have two problems. Now you have two keys to protect, and if you lose one of them, problems. Bootstrapping is a big thing. So you have outdated software. You want to get up to speed. So that's something to think about as well, but you can jump in anytime. But I have more.
Rob Osstein, just going to quick comments on two things. One, I agree about the lots of DNS specific time in the TTL stuff. That was self-inflicted DNS damage on DNSSEC. Don't worry about it. The backup keys, I would recommend you at least think about a bit more. The main reason being that there's no way to do an emergency key roll, basically. You can do staged key rolls, you can do planned key rolls. The backup key is basically in order to allow you to convert a disaster into a, oh, okay, we're doing a planned key roll early.
Yeah. I have some more slides later. Maybe it makes more sense to talk about it after I've gone through that. So what are the objectives? Well, my main objective is planned roles. I want a process that is automated, that can work unattended. And I want to leave a trail for outdated software. I mean, people install things on Docker images and they don't update it. Might be the wrong way to do it, but it happens. So I want them to be able to get the latest somehow. So this is going, and if you read the draft, you may notice that, yeah, maybe I changed things a bit, but that was also after discussing, and I'd rather focus here on how I think things should work and then have a discussion about that and move forward. But I think this is still in line with the draft. This is basically, there's no role happening at the moment at all. What the draft then says is that you can have a new object, a .tel object, and it basically refers back to where the certificate file has been found. If a relying party sees this, they can go like, okay, that's great, that's is in agreement with what I had, nothing to do. So I can just continue as normal. Then during, and this is where I'd rather focus on the slides than what's the exact text of the document. Is this the right slide deck? I want to know. No, it isn't. It isn't. It is not. Do you still have the other one? Because, yeah, I can keep talking because, yeah. So, what shall I talk about? You should never upload your first version, draft of a slide deck.
So I guess in the meantime, Warren Kumari, DNS Mini. A lot of people believe that the DNSSEC trust anchor should actually have a backup key already published the whole time, and that's been a long discussion. And
okay, well, there is something to be said for that, but then you really also have to think about how you protect both. And I'm not against it, but I do want to avoid overcomplicating the model.
And part of it is the question of protected against what, right? If you're worried about cryptographic attacks on the key, that's one thing.
So,
if you're just worried about staging, it's a different thing. It's basically got to do the trust analysis. The threat analysis.
No, I welcome that discussion. So one thing you could protect against, if you're afraid of key loss, you can use hardware security model. Key theft, you can use hardware security modules with card sets and all that. That make it very hard to steal a key, let's say. But then you still have an issue of key loss that you may want to think about. But what are the properties of that when you now have two keys to protect? Because, yeah, maybe it's slightly better because if you lose the new key, you still have the old one and vice versa. But, yeah, in any case, are these there? But it's missing the titles, but yes. Yeah, oh, it's just not full screen. No. Right, okay, yes, back. So, TA role. So, we were here, everything is fine. There's just this new object that says to the relying party, yeah, I think this is still my current certificate and my current key. Now, during a key role, what you could do, and what the document kind of says, but it omits a important detail, is you can set up a parallel structure, actually. You can set up a new TA certificates, a new key. You can publish all the objects there. You can have a trust anchor there, a trust anchor tile file that points back. And you can actually set this up before you publish a new trust anchor tile file in the blue part. It's like the old current, let's say. So a trust anchor who is performing this can set all of this up, and then they can do validation. They can make sure that everything is okay before they communicate this to the world. There is one thing though. We have these pesky authority information access URIs that is basically, I think, intended as an informational thing. We had to talk about it in a long time ago though. There's a back reference for every certificate that says this is the rsync URI where my parent certificate lives. If you're really, really strict about that, you would find that there's differences. If you find something through a different path, you might reject things, and that would really complicate this. So I would suggest that we talk about deprecating the this field, or at least make it a informational thing.
Rob, also again, we already have to ignore AIAs during internal key roles further down the tree. I'm pretty sure we got that right somewhere buried in the depths of the original documents, that they're advisory. You should not reject anything just because the AIA is wrong. So I don't think there's any document change needed.
I don't think it's a key for the ripeness receive validator either, but it's good to know because, yeah. Another place where this may cause an issue is that, in case you want to change your publication points, you have issues. Maybe you want to outsource it, and you can't otherwise. So, but anyway, you can have two parallel structures. And what the draft actually currently says is that you would go to the after stage very quickly. but I'm quite willing to discuss that and say, maybe not go there very soon. You could leave both in place for a while. This also gives people the opportunity to, update their relying party software manually. You can communicate this new tel out of band, as you'll probably have to do, at least if you're beginning to deploy this stuff, because not everybody will support it straight away, I'm sure. And maybe it's something you want to build up operational experience with before you go further, let's say. But eventually, you'll want to get rid of the old key. So afterwards, what you can do is you can throw away your key, your old key, you can throw away all the objects and just leave a pointer in place. These things need to be signed with a long validity time. We can argue about how long makes sense. There's currently something in the document that says 1 year, but that's completely arbitrary. Maybe it should be much longer. But yeah, that's it essentially. That's being proposed. And you could, in theory, also talk about using this to have backup keys, rather like indicate this is a backup new thing. It's not supposed to be used. But I think we probably don't need a full structure like this then, so it's an interesting discussion to have. What else did I want to say about this? Well, maybe I'll come back later. Yeah, that was one thing. No, sorry. So again, maybe click through this. If you read the document, it basically goes from this to this very quickly. But after discussions, feedback, I think it does make sense to have this stage there for a longer time, at least until operational experience shows that people can do the role automatically. What I do think makes sense, if we want to pre-provision keys, that can be a separate discussion, but as written, and that's what I wanted to say. The TA.star in the blue column here immediately points to the new trust anchor here. And when that happens, I believe that relying parties should be able to trust that the TA did their work. I mean, the TA can mess up their system in many other ways. If they've done the validation, I think it shouldn't be necessary for an arbitrary number of relying parties to double check whether they did their work correctly. At least that's my view. But yeah, if we really want to go there and we say we want a pre-provisioning key, or we want to say we intend to roll on this day, and you are welcome to verify, then I think we can do it, but we need to rethink the structure a bit. Then the TOL file that is currently just pointing at a single certificate and set of URIs that is supposed to be current may have to be extended to something that says this is what is current and this is what is coming. So can be done, but in any case, very happy to have a discussion on this because, yeah, I don't claim to know exactly how this should work, but I find it important enough to make a proposal and see where we go. So with that, I would say comments.
Rob Ostein yet again. I like this. I don't think it's quite cooked yet, but I think it's going in a good direction. I totally support this work.
Okay, thank you. So, well, I'm here all week. If people want to discuss offline, which may be better for this, then great. I'm around and happy to do so.
Thank you. That's it. Everyone go home. Or not here. All done. Time to go. Yep. Yes. Okay, cool, thanks.
You are feeling more happy now. Well, okay. Well,